All right, so my presentation deals with language policy and ideology, so I would like very shortly touch upon these things and give more attention to cultural transmission theme. I'll explain why. Now, first of all, we know that language policy means state decisions about language status, usage, the rights of language users, and so on. And we also know that in nation states where the situation changes very quickly, languages which are not used in formal sectors actually face real threats to disappear. The other thing which is quite important today, speaking about changes taking place in language policy, that, actually the developed policy is implemented in education system. So the standardized education system, which is, let's say, regulated by different legal documents, means that, you have to follow different rules concerning literacy requirements, contacts with state institutions, and so on. So it is important that, language has to be legitimated in state documents, otherwise the language becomes marginalized and loses its social and economic importance, political weight also. We know that there are different types of language policies that, let's say, academicians talk about, so we may speak about this overt or covert language policy, which, let's say, gives particular attention to one language or the other. We may speak about tolerant language policy, or language policy which can be forced. All the policy types mentioned, actually they can be open and they can be covered. So we do understand that situation, particular difficult situation is with local languages and less widely used languages, because you may, so to say, force some languages in social spheres. You can also speak about little worth of little languages and cultures and so on. And this way, just stigmatize, ideologically stigmatize some of the languages. Today, many authors speak about how language policy is being used as instrument of manipulation in, so to say, battlefield of different ideologies. And like Andrea mentioned, so let's say language ecology becomes very much important. Whereas about language ideology, we started to speak, so to say, some 2 decades ago. And at the moment, for any politicians and language politicians, language planning, language management becomes very much important. So we know that ideology can be seen in views of people on languages which are being used in cultural cooperation, in linguistic practice, and we know that the most popular ideology actually is standardized language ideology, which, so to say, speaks that one state, one culture, one language. Now we know that language situation and context changes very quickly. If we speak about real space or virtual space, particularly in virtual spaces, where 80% of internet websites use or present information in English. That means that more than 90% who do not speak English, for about 10% can understand English. That means that for those 90% actually suffer this linguistic separation. So, what can be said about Lithuanian language policy? I should say that it is full of contradictions. On the one hand, I think many small states face globalization as a threat, because this ideology of one state, one culture, one language actually shows that small states keep to this ethnocentric orientation in language policy. So now this ethnocentricity becomes natural for a state which tries to regain, independence. But entering US, European Union, now you have just to find, so to say, the balance between this ethnocentric orientation with the policy of multilingualism and multiculturalism. This morning on the radio I've heard that our parliament today is going to discuss the new law on national language and state language, and some speakers mentioned that yes, they still want to strengthen the state language. That means that this ethnocentric orientation will remain. Well, we know that this national language is part of the culture. It's an important factor. So now I would like to switch to cultural transmission things, because actually there are questions that we raised planning our research project about the cultural transmission, because we thought that it is important to learn what in globalization context, how the situation changes with the cultural identity formation and cultural transmission. What is the role of the family and the school in cultural transmission? How this cultural transmission takes place? Whether it is still the vertical model or the other, because on that depends what education policy should be, and language policy as part of it. So our project was called Identity, Cultural Transmission and National Education. Well, it had many goals. One of them was to analyze the situation in educational institutions. So we tried actually to analyze different aspects of cultural identity, that is linguistic identity, ethnocultural, social, religious, gender, and within, so to say, this scheme, we also spoke, well, basing, so to say, our methodology on different authors who speak about, well, so to say, inborn and cultural identity. Sociologists speak about the constructed one, social identity. Many of them speak and say that in conditions of globalization, actually, the hybrid identity appears because, well, people mobility, moving, so to say, into different cultures leads to it. So, speaking about, well, cultural transmission, so it can be vertical, when, so to say, this vertical also is called intergenerational one, when we speak, let's say, grandparents, parents, children. So this way, the culture and also linguistic identity is being passed on. We may speak about horizontal one, which, so to say, takes place when communicating in same age group, in non-formal environment, and also we may speak about this horizontal one and indirect transmission, which actually takes place in schools, media, church. So in our research, our sample were 11 form students, their parents, their grandparents, and their teachers. I will speak only about one aspect and findings concerning linguistic identity. So our informants were from different ethnographic areas of Lithuania. All in all, well, there were 10 groups of different generations, plus teachers. So, what were the findings concerning, well, languages? So, all the generations and students, their parents, grandparents, well, spoke of how much they value their national language. Actually, all of them understand how it is important to preserve national culture and national identity. So most of our informants said that in the families, well, standard Lithuanian is being used. From the interviews with the teachers, we understood that the position of the teachers and the teachers interviewed were not only, they were not language teachers, they were teachers of different subjects. Just, so to say, class mistresses of the students. So among them, well, let's say there was a teacher of technologies and mathematics and, well, biology and so on. So teachers' position towards Lithuanian language, that is national state language, is clearly ethnocentric. So, well, they think that Lithuanian language should be in the focus of attention of all the nation, and they think that school does not do enough to preserve it. Well, we had a few questions concerning the local dialects. So actually all generations spoke very positively about dialects, and they said that this makes Lithuanian language very special. Majority of informants said that they do not speak dialect languages, though they said that they heard well, their parents and grandparents using this language. Well, they said they are sorry that their parents did not teach them. But still there are some students which speak dialects, and they said that they learned it not from their parents but from their grandparents. So that means that actually this vertical intergenerational transmission is not the regular one. So parents actually do not take, do not give much importance to well, linguistic education, speaking about dialects well, in the family, and in general in transmitting national culture. Grandparents, so to say, play the first fiddle here. Those students who use dialect often in formal and non-formal setting, they say that dialect language actually conflicts with standard Lithuanian. And they say because of that they have problems at school during the Lithuanian language lessons and so on, because as you know, well, that spelling, grammar things, so to say, here interfere. So the best situation with dialects is in the western part of Lithuania, in Samodžišė, in Žemaitija. So here we see very strong transmission forms, vertical one and horizontal one. And so our informants from this part of the country, they said that they use dialect language in the families, that they grew up with this language, that they hear this language everywhere, in the city, in the shops, and that they well, are not afraid to speak the language. So actually they say that they use this language more often than standard Lithuanian. While in the other regions, situation is not that good. We asked our informants who has to take care about well, national language education, also culture preservation, transmission to young generation. So there is no agreement between our informants. So parents actually said that school has to take care of all these things. Well, grandparents thought that well, families and school, because as one of the informants said, that native language is one of the components of spiritual life and the strongest one. Well, teachers who were in this research interviewed, they think that the role of the school has to be more important, that families are not able to transmit this linguistic culture appropriately in the families. But on the other hand, well, teachers think that schools do not do everything for this linguistic culture transmission. So, as I have mentioned, actually there are different linguistic culture transmission models, and those of grandparents and teachers, they are more conscious one compared to those of the parents. And as I have mentioned, so this indirect vertical transmission in the families takes place. We also asked questions about the dangers to the language, whether they know about any. So all the generations actually have very optimistic views about it, and well, they believe that the Lithuanian language has the future, and that it will manage to survive. That's it.